American Beauty, personified as the Nine Muses, by Charles Astor Bristed, published 1870. This is recorded to celebrate the 9th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The Nine Muses. There are few mythological legends more striking and picturesque than that which relates to the 9 daughters of Jupiter and Mnemosyne. In the early ages of the world, when it was the custom to assign a celestial cause to every extraordinary effect, the powers of song, memory, invention, skill, etc., were supposed to be excited by certain goddesses, denominated Muses. From the period of the earliest tradition, these fair immortals had their seats in Pieria on Mount Olympus and in Boeotia on Mount Helicon. According to Hesiod, they were born on Olympus, near the pinnacle on which Jupiter, Zeus in the Greek, was enthroned, whence they visited Helicon to bathe in Hippocrene and celebrate their choral dances around the altar on the crest of the sacred mountain. In Homer, as in later authors, they are described as singing festive songs at the banquets of the gods and conferring on mortals the gift of poetry. Though occupied only with the gentler and more graceful arts, the sweet-voiced deities were not without their sterner traits. They doomed Thamyris, who had presumed to excel them in music, to blindness, stripped the Sirens, who had dared to contest the laurel with them, of their wings, and for a similar offense metamorphosized the 9 daughters of King Pieros into wild birds. The Muses were worshipped with libations of water or milk and honey, had temples built in their honor, and were represented each with particular attributes in works of art. Besides the usual epithets common to all goddesses, and derived from beauty and costume, the Muses were styled sweet-speaking, perfect-speaking, honey-breathing, etc., etc. Hesiod was the first to state the names of all the 9, by which they are generally designated. Clio, the muse of history, Enterpe of lyric poetry, Thalia of comedy, Melpomene of tragedy, Terpsichore of choral dance and song, Erato of erotic verse, Polyhymnia of the sublime hymn, Urania of astronomy, and Calliope of epic poetry. Urania is the patron deity of astronomy. A circlet of stars sparkles upon her brow, and her azure robe is looped with a crescent. Her left arm rests on a celestial globe, while with a rod in her right hand she traces out some mystic figure. Thalia presides over comedy and epigram. She carries a grotesque mask in one hand, and with the other holds up her robe. She is also regarded as the patroness of husbandry and planting. Polyhymnia, who is supposed to reign over sacred poetry and eloquence, is seen seated, leaning her head on her left hand and holding a roll of parchment in her right. On one side is a tripod, and on the other a lyre. Calliope, the goddess of epic poetry, wears a gold diadem in her hair and holds a partially unrolled manuscript in her hand, upon which are inscribed the opening lines of the Iliad. In her left hand is an ivory trumpet. Erato, the muse of marriage feasts and pantomimic dancing, is shown playing on the stringed instrument named pharynx. Her forehead is crowned with roses and myrtles, and at her side is Cupid with a lighted torch. Melpomene, the genius of tragedy, is pictured as a queenly woman. Her emblems are generally a dagger and a scepter. She is crowned and wears a scarf. Terpsichore, the joyous muse of the choric dance and the inventor of the pipe, does not belie her name, which signifies literally "she who loves dancing." She is usually depicted in some mirthful attitude, holding a light scarf which floats about her. Clio is the muse and glory of history. She is seated, writing on a roll of parchment supported on a marble slab, upon which also rests the trumpet of fame. She is crowned with laurels. Euterpe, as her name denotes, is an inspirer of pleasure. To her is ascribed the invention of tragic chorus. She is represented as a young maiden, holding two flutes in her left hand, her right resting on a lyre. The Muses have ever been favorite subjects with both painter and poet, and have not unfrequently lent their inspiration to the artist who has sought to portray them worthily. In recent times they have given no suggestion more fortunate than the one that induced Mr. Fagnani to employ his art on the present series of pictures, in which various choice types of American beauty are introduced to us in the guise of the 9 Muses. The idea of the work first occurred to the artist on hearing a foreigner remark that America afforded no examples of the purely classic face so often encountered in the Old World. To demonstrate the fallacy of this assertion, the artist conceived the plan of painting the portraits of 9 American ladies of acknowledged beauty, idealizing them no further than to give them the accessories with which the daughters of Mnemosyne are commonly represented. That Mr. Fagnani's design is as happy in execution as it is fresh in conception will scarcely be questioned by anyone who examines this unique gallery of American beauty. The 9 Muses. An elegant essay from the pen of T.W. Higginson, lately read by him before the N.E. Women's Club, depicts the 6 primary goddesses of Greece as so many pure and beautiful types of an ideal womanhood, symbolizing the successive stages of her development as girl, maid, lover, wife, mother, and housekeeper, under the names of Artemis, Athena, Aphrodite, Her, Demeter, and Hertia. He concludes with this magnificent prophecy, quote, "Nothing shall drive me from the belief that there is arising in America, amid all our frivolities, a type of virgin womanhood, new in history, undescribed in fiction, from which there may proceed in generations yet to come a priesthood more tender, a majesty more pure and grand, than anything which poet ever sang or temple enthroned. Through a culture such as no other age has offered, through the exercise of rights never before conceded, of duties never yet imposed, will this heroic sisterhood be reared, noble forms that shall eclipse those fair humanities of old religion, as when classic architecture had reached perfection, there rose the Gothic, and made the Greek seem cold." In a chivalrous spirit akin to this, the Chevalier Joseph Fagnini of New York refutes by a series of portraits of American women the assertion of a foreigner that the type of beauty which we admire is far inferior to that of the Greek sculptors, and that we have not a purely classical face among us. Never had valiant knight, lifting the gauntlet in vindication of his fair one's charms, more kindly favor than has met Fagnini. Ladies of the very highest social position have granted him repeated sittings. From Massachusetts to Louisiana, from the lakes to the Gulf, each section has lent its loveliest to aid the artist in his self-imposed labor. It was no easy task to present 9 modern beauties as the daughters of Mnemosyne, to clothe the lifelike portraiture of the acknowledged belle in the classic drapery of the old mythology, to make each picture harmonize so perfectly with the peculiar vocation of the character represented that the gazer forgets the muse is only playing a part for the nonce, and at the same time to surround each with such an atmosphere of purity and dignity that the sanctity of private life and the shrinking modesty of a virtuous womanhood shall still be unprofaned. The success with which this has been accomplished shows a rare discretion and refinement of feeling on the part of the artist. Mr. Childs has the honor of introducing these pictures to the public. He has shown himself equal to the occasion, and the 9 Muses, fitly enshrined with chaste and elegant surroundings, have already received the homage of thousands. Even the critics seem awed to silence by this array of beauty, and we have been spared the comments of professional item hunters. The Muses, each with her proper attribute, are arranged in a semicircle, blonde alternating with brunette as far as practicable, though the predilection of the painter for the former is manifest. Where all are beautiful, it is perhaps unwise to discriminate, and I intend no invidious comparisons in giving you briefly my impression of each, for as one star differeth from another in glory, so each of these fair forms has its distinctive charm. One is struck by the entire unconsciousness of the group. With one exception, there is no appearance of posing for effect. Euterpe, the muse of lyrical poetry, bears in her left hand 2 flutes. Her right rests upon a lyre. This blonde, one of Gotham's sweetest singers, is apparently the youngest of the group. Here is an immature beauty. There is less strength of character than sweet innocence in her bearing that makes her nearer Artemis than Aphrodite. Clio, laurel-crowned muse of history, is seated writing. A parchment scroll lies before her, and the trumpet of fame. A brunette whose face is cold and passionless, but wears an expression of deep and earnest thought. Telecore, lover of the dance, is here engaged in her favorite amusement. The pen can do no justice to the ethereal lightness of the graceful figure, enveloped in the grassy folds of its floating drapery. A green fillet, binding the luxuriant waves of yellow hair, lends a deeper glow to the cheek already flushed with pleasure. The delicate limb is slightly raised, the rounded figure is redundant with life and motion, but there is nothing of the voluptuous abandon of the ballet. Perfect freedom and perfect modesty characterize this fairest of blondes. Melpomene, the queen of tragedy, is represented by a queenly woman. She is very properly, in drapery and accessories, the most severe classic of the group. A tiara gives majesty to the noble brow. Her right hand holds a dagger near her heart, but that heart, shining in those magnificent eyes, would fail to nerve that hand to tragic deed. The dark hair and olive skin hint at a tropical origin. A Creole by birth, this superb woman is the wife of the Italian consul at New York. Erato, muse of amatory verse, stands not alone. A Cupid with a torch goes before her. A garland of roses and myrtle surrounds the forehead, and she bears a stringed instrument. She is perhaps the best exemplar of a purely physical type of beauty. Of her golden hair and soft blue eyes, poets would rave and painters dream. The West claims this model of a happy maidenhood. Calliope comes next. A roll in one hand bears the first lines of Homer's great epic, the other holds an ivory trumpet. A gold diadem gleams in her dark tresses. An elevated expression of pride and enthusiasm rests upon her face, and you feel that so might she, like Miriam of old, have gone forth trumpet in hand to greet a victorious father. Polyhymnia, muse of the sacred song, is seated. Her head rests upon her hand. Her eyes are heavenward turned. The dignity of matronly beauty is hers. That elevated expression, that stately pose might have been Cornelia's. They tell of a good old stock. By the spell of her noble womanhood a hero was won, and a priceless dower she brought him in her kinship to the grandest martyr who gave his sweet young life for the Republic. Urania, with all her accessories, a starry circle on her brow, her azure robe looped up with a crescent, celestial globe and all, is yet no stargazer. Methinks the painter should have seen in the flashing eye, the spirited curve of the nostril, the commanding poise of the head, the freedom of a maiden whose high-bred beauty spurns the labor he has imposed upon her as a patron goddess of science. Was it that he dared but offer to such beauty the heavenly spheres? Thalia, muse of comedy, gathers her robe across her fair bosom with one hand, holding in her left a grotesque mask. In her soft brown hair the simplest flowers are twined. Naivete and merry humor are beaming in her face, but behind that just a touch of weariness that shows there is more in her life than the thoughtless mirth of a gay young girl. Even as we gaze, the beautiful eyes are tremulous with tears, and infinite sadness seems to rest where a moment before all was infinite gladness. The only face of all the group whose witchery depends entirely on expression and is not enhanced by color, it will lose none of its charms in an engraving. Were I the Paris of critics, the golden apple should be hers. Signed, C.A.B. End of American Beauty Personified as the Nine Muses by Charles Astor Bristed. Recorded by Michelle Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.